Hey, welcome back to Common Sense OT Security, where we discuss OT security topics through the lens of common sense, which is often very much different from what you hear every day on social media and in vendor briefings, in the industry media, etc. And let me give you one detail why this is totally different, or very much different. In common sense OT security, we're mostly interested in figuring out ways how to measurably improve your OT security, whereas the rest of the discussion is that you see in social media, etc., is usually around how the threats are ever evolving. Oh, that's so bad, and then the Bauxit does this, and the Dynamite does that. In my opinion, this isn't really helpful. So we are trying to take a more rational approach here that is focusing on results. How can you improve your OT security posture? Certainly, proponents of the other side, the threat-centric side, would just say, well, you just write us a check and then we'll take care of everything. But that often cannot really be backed up with common sense, logic, and reason. So today, we are continuing with our mini series on OT asset inventory basics. And today we look at a very foundational entity, if you will, in that whole OT asset inventory playbook, and that is the network inventory. So just very briefly, if you have all your assets in all your devices in some kind of database, that still isn't good enough. You must be able to also inventory your networks. You must know about those individual networks, their addresses, the devices in those networks, like the endpoints. You must know about any cross-network traffic. You must know about those conduits in ISA 62443 parlance, IC, excuse me. So, and there, that tells you that an OT asset network inventory is absolutely necessary. If you don't have that, don't tell me you have visibility into your assets, into your OT infrastructure. No, you don't. And just for the IT experts in the audience, why is that so super important in OT? Well, very simple. In OT, you have much more networks than in IT. So you will have to deal with hundreds of individual networks. That is not the case in IT, but in OT, it's the norm. It's nothing unusual. So you must be prepared for that. And just imagine when we are talking about several hundred networks, and if you're not able to distinguish them, so if you're not able to exactly tell which network a given device is a member of, then you're pretty much lost. So don't call that visibility, my friends. You don't have any visibility. And that is certainly a little bit disturbing when you see threat detection vendors talking about all the visibility and the network security, etc., when in fact they don't know about networks. And there is one simple tell. So don't get me wrong, this is not just about bashing those vendors. It's a technical reality. How can you determine if a given platform exposes those networks or not? Well, very simple. Just check for those network addresses, like, with the slash, with the slash 24, slash 25, slash 16, or slash 8 worst case. And so those are your network addresses. And if you don't see them anywhere, my friends, that particular platform has no clue about networks. And that is usually the result of the discovery technology that was used, because if you have to rely on passive sniffing, then you're blind when it comes to network. Certainly you will know about the IP addresses of the endpoints, but you have no way of telling which particular network those endpoints belong to, those IP addresses. And that leaves you very much in the blind. And why is this so super important? Because from an OT security perspective, let me tell you one thing. your endpoint protection only goes so far. So in OT security, when you think about mitigation, then you will have to strongly rely on network security. That we are talking about firewalls, etc., filter rules for your switches. And if you don't know what networks you have, then there is no way that you could implement network security. So this is why this is super important. Now let's look at how those networks, or how that network inventory looks like in OT base. So here you see we are in the inventory part of OT base, and in the left sidebar you see we have selected networks, because OT base gives you different angles on your OT infrastructure. Usually we have been looking at the devices angle, where you just look at individual devices, and now we are looking at networks, and this gives us a list of all the networks in our inventory, in our OT infrastructure here in our sample database. And just as a case in point, as you can see, there is an address column where you see all those network addresses lined up with their / something. So that already tells you, oh no, this is a network address. This is not an endpoint. The other thing that you see exposed here, obviously at first glance, there are color codes. And this is something that you can assign individually as a user. This has to do with the network group. So you can group your networks into groups, which is very convenient, because in OT, there are usually, if not to say in almost any given case, there are typical use cases for a given network. So you will find a cluster of endpoints that basically do the same thing. And that could be, in our example, a real-time I/O function, like where you would find a bunch of VFDs, a bunch of actuators for the IT guys. So variable frequency drives. Those are the drives that spin the motors for conveyor belts, as an example. And so our user here has designated that whole network as real-time I/O. That makes a lot of sense, because those real-time I/O networks have different requirements when it comes to bandwidth, latency, etc., than other networks, such as a SCADA network, where you would mostly find HMIs and SCADA systems, or as a switch management network, which obviously doesn't have any real-time requirements. And so in OT-based, this is very easy to label those networks, to box them into groups, which adds a whole new level of transparency. And so then you would also have the opportunity to call out your safety networks, which again have different requirements when it comes to latency, and certainly also when it comes to security, because you want those networks to be super secure, because otherwise shit could go down when they get compromised. And again, this is something that grouping that you can define on your own, to show you rather quickly how that works. So in the extended network inventory section, you can define your network groups, you can assign color codes, you can add a description, whatever you like. And then this will be used in this network inventory here. And the other interesting thing, if you paid attention, you will have already seen that, is you can assign a zone to any of these networks. In other words, now we are already deep in IEC 62443 territory with the concept of zones and conduits. So for example, you see that in our case here, the I/O networks have all been placed in the manufacturing zone. That also means in turn that any endpoints in those networks will inherit that zoning from the network, unless you overwrite it for the individual endpoint. Okay, so that already gives us a lot of mileage. And then you can go further and you can just drill down here with a double click and get all the details for a given network. That usually starts with a sitemap where you see, oh, this is where that thing is actually located. Okay, so in other words, networks in OT-base have a location, a geolocation, which is very important. Because just imagine how many private 192.168.00/24 networks you have throughout your organization. Let's just say 12. Then certainly you must have a means of distinguishing those individual networks. And the geolocation is a very simple and effective means to do that. And so here you can see where exactly that network is residing. We get an automatic network topology map here. And this is, just to be clear, this is the physical layer. So this has nothing to do with data flow. OT-base also maps data flow. That's a different topic. But this is not what you see in threat detection products where they have these wobbly flower bed-like diagrams where when you drag one endpoint with the mouse, then the whole thing starts to wobble. Right? So that is what in technical terms is called a force-directed graph that tries to reassemble itself, and then they use this animation to see what's going on. But that's data flow. That's not network topology. So what you see here is physical connectivity, where you see the individual switches that connect all the endpoints for that particular network. Okay, very important. And this whole thing is created automatically. So there is no manual editing involved. We'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. Then you see a mapping of the address space. So you see from the available address space in this network, roughly a third is used. We see any free IP addresses, and we see any reserved IP addresses. Like in this example, a couple of IP addresses have been reserved for a new project. And then here is the whole address list in numerical order, where you see all the endpoints exposed. And any unused IP addresses are color-coded in green. So that gives you an idea what you can expect from a network inventory. Obviously, this goes a long way, not just because it includes IP address management, but from an OT security angle, it is certainly super, super important. For example, when you think in the direction of network security, and when you think in respect to IEC 62443 with the zones and conduits model. So let me just give you a quick example. So one thing that we can do here is we can inspect multiple networks and how they might connect, which is obviously pretty interesting for OT security and networks and network security. So now we have selected two networks, and then we create a consolidated or composite network topology. But we want to actually see how this is overlaid by the logical networks. And in order to do that, we say, okay, show us the logical networks here. And there they are. So now you see all the endpoints that belong to this particular network, and you don't bother with that non-descriptive name. So that is just randomly assigned. This is usually not something you would find in real life. So that could be like the conveyor belt 5 control network or something. And now you see all the endpoints in that network, how they are connected. And then down here, there is this other network, logical network, that we have looked at earlier. So this is the non-real-time I/O network. And here you can see the conduits, because I just need to highlight anything that goes in and out. And then that shows me, they're connected to that switch here. Okay, so that's your conduit. Same down here or here, right? So that is pretty useful. And then you can do a couple of other layouts, such as, organic. If you just want, it's just, I want something that I can print out and put in a frame and use that as some decoration for my cubicle. Or you could also do it in a hierarchy, like your Purdue hierarchy, where all the actuators now are at the bottom. Okay, but again, this is about physical connectivity. And this is how that works. And then you could also, you can just modify this layout with a couple of different additions, like you can hide something, you can show something, you can even make manual edits. You could just place unmanaged switches in there, and then you can also export the whole thing to Visio if you want to. So that gives you a lot of options to explore your network architecture, which is something that you will have to do when you want to implement network security, which is the weapon of choice for the OT security warrior, because your endpoint security only goes so far in OT. Okay, the other thing that I would like to point out, this not just shows you IP networks. That would be easy. In OT, you also have a bunch of other network types, the so-called field buses, and certainly you will also find them here. So, for example, you will find Profibus, also discovered automatically by OTBase, and that might look like this. So here you have a Profibus, a segment with a couple of devices, and this is how network addresses can look like. Well, the address of this PLC is 0C. This is what addressing in field buses looks like. Certainly the important point is, well, you also see your field buses, right, with their connectivity. And this is also something that you cannot expect from threat detection products that have to rely on passive sniffing. So this goes a very long way. So you would also see your EtherCAT as an example, just another case where the network is not using the IP protocol, where you have addresses like 1001, 1002, etc. So all of that good stuff is available, and then you can always drill down and examine the endpoints, and then it gets really, really fancy. So in other words, my friends, when you hear the talk about visibility, OT asset visibility, or extreme visibility, you don't have extreme visibility if you don't see anything about the networks. And that is something you should keep in mind if you, at some point in time, actually want to take your fate in your own hands and want to improve your security posture. This will not be possible without having a very detailed understanding of your network architecture. It's not just about the endpoints. It's not just about the data flow. It's about how all those endpoints are connected to individual networks. Let me give you an example. From a security perspective, certainly it makes a lot of difference. The question, which other, let's just say you consider this one PC on a network, this might be compromised. Which other devices could be affected immediately because they reside on the same network? Because then you would assume there is no protection here. So that is a very important consideration, and you will be totally lost if you don't have any network visibility. And you can tell right away if you have network visibility or not if you don't have a network inventory, if you don't see any network addresses, if you don't see an address list of a given network, then you know you have no network visibility. And that's not the place where you want to be in, my friends. Okay, you don't have any questions, so I will just keep it short and sweet today. See you next week. Bye-bye.